Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je m'appelle Jean-François Gagné. Merci d'être là. Après le lunch, c'est jamais facile, mais je pense qu'on a un sujet aujourd'hui pour vous inspirer. Donc, je vais vous parler un peu des bios de chaque panéliste. Je vais faire ça quand même brièvement parce que je pense qu'on pourrait être ici encore pour l'heure au complet qu'on a. Donc, d'abord, Kate Gallego is mayor of Phoenix. She is the second elected female mayor in Phoenix history. Mayor Gallego is a North American vice chair of C40 Cities, a group focused on climate action. She is also co-chair of Climate Mayors and chair of the Jobs, Education, and the Workforce Committee for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. At the end, Jordan Davis is the executive director at Smart Columbus. Jordan is co-founder and director of the Central Ohio Leadership Academy, member of the board for the Columbus Schools of Girls, and former three-term chair of the Create Columbus Commission. Jean-François Barsoum is a senior innovation executive at IBM. He was part of the core team that built the smart city concept at the early 2000. He is chair of the Canadian branch of Mr. Gore's Foundation for Climate Change Education, the Disruptive Technology Committee of the Montreal Chamber of Commerce, and the outgoing director of the Quebec Smart Transportation Expert Group. He is also the part of the committee overseeing the application of the Quebec policy on sustainable mobility and has advised the Commissioner of the Environment of Canada on clean tech. Finally, Patrick Aubin is Senior Vice President, Cities and Development, Engineering Services Canada at SNC-Lavalin. With more than 25 years of experience in engineering and project management, he has worked on numerous large projects throughout the province of Quebec, from airports to hospitals, schools and labs. Aujourd'hui, la majorité de la présentation de la conférence va être en anglais, mais les panélistes sont libres de parler en français comme bon le semble. Donc, pour le reste de la présentation, on va passer en anglais. So, the first topic I would like to address when we talk about tomorrow's metropolis is obviously smart cities. When we think about creating tomorrow's metropolis, we often talk about smart cities. So I would like to ask our speaker what kind of smart cities you envision, and most importantly, how to get there. Maybe Mayor Gallego can go and can start the conversation.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here with such a distinguished group of panelists. Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the United States. It has a very similar population size to Montreal, but we are a much younger city. We really have started to grow since 1950, and that gives us some advantages in smart cities. We have newer technology, newer systems, and so we can invest in areas that'll help us manage our greenhouse gas emissions, but also be a better city with a good quality of life where our residents can get the information they need, they're digitally connected, have a strong transportation system. Actually, I'm regularly now on smart city panels with Columbus. So my last one was with the mayor of Columbus, who's a huge fan of Jordan's. And we are both trying to do a lot in advanced autonomous electric vehicles, for example. So one of our big partners in Phoenix is Waymo, and we just last month became the first city to have autonomous vehicles dropping people off at the airport, which is airports are tough environments for mayors. There's a lot going on. Not everyone knows where they're driving. And so to introduce autonomous vehicles was a risk, but Phoenix really prides ourselves in being an innovative city that will try new projects, and we want to reduce our emissions. We think vehicle electrification is going to be an important part of that. But it's also, we've gotten some real international attention from that in several delegations, particularly from Europe, seeing how we've had autonomous vehicles in our downtown and now at the airport. Although our biggest attention came, we had a comedian who rode in one of our autonomous vehicles, and he put video on of the steering wheel turning itself, and then he wasn't wearing his seatbelt, and so he got yelled at by the voice of the vehicle. But he finishes his video by saying, guys, the future is happening right now, and it's in Phoenix, Arizona, which every mayor loves to hear, that your city's on the leading edge. We want to be leading in vehicles. We're also doing a lot on digital equity and making sure that everyone has access to get online. And we have a great partnership and a digital canopy with our schools. And that's been another area where we really think we have to invest in our young people. And COVID taught us how essential it is to be able to be digitally connected. So silver lining from COVID is that we've been able to make those investments. And I think we'll have a whole generation of Phoenix residents who will benefit from it.
Thank you, Mayor Gallego. Jean-François?
Well, if Waymo's working at airports, could you have them move the luggage around too?
I vote for that.
I think that's where they need the most help. Okay, so if we just think about the concept of intelligent cities for a moment, intelligence is really just about three things if we think about it even just in human terms. It's about perceiving what's happening around you. It's about building a mental model of how things are working because of the information that you're perceiving, and then acting in a way that influences the future based on what you've learned, right? That's basically what intelligence is. And really in technology, we have names for two of those three. You know, the first one is IoT. It's basically sensing. It's understanding, you know, how many people are in the swimming pool, how many cars are driving across the bridge, what's the speed, etc. The second one is we tend to call AI. It's how do we take all this data and make some sense out of all of it? Let's build a model that is going to help us predict or understand how things have been working, and B, predict how things are going to be happening tomorrow. The third one is really political, right? That is just, if we have all this information, can we do something with it? And I think most cities have managed to make progress on the first two. It's been uneven, but you know, most cities understand that yes, they have to collect more data, and B, they have to understand the data they're collecting. The tough part is doing something about it afterwards, right? That's the challenge that you have. And there aren't that many levels of government, whether they're cities or provinces or states, or that have explicitly a sort of an evidence-based policy decision machine, right? Can I create a policy out of the information that I'm getting out of those systems? It's still very much a political human process. And so I think, you know, there are different challenges around how do we make cities more intelligent. And I think you can really, you know, categorize them into those three buckets. And how you deal with those challenges, I think, is going to define how successful cities are going to be.
Yeah, thank you, Jean-François. Obviously, data governance is a big issue. Jordan, do you want to add something?
Sure. I mean, I think the combination of what both of you said is really the complexity of what a smart city is. We all define it differently, whether it's government efficiency or resident benefit. So how do you experience technology in your day-to-day life that improves the quality of life in your city or makes one city better to live in than another? And we were fortunate in 2016 to win the Smart Cities Challenge in the United States. Montreal similarly won Canadian Smart Cities Challenge. And we were awarded a large chunk of money, about $40 million from the federal government, 10 from a private philanthropy, Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, and then we matched a large proportion of it locally. And for the past 5 years, we've been deploying a comprehensive portfolio of smart mobility technologies, from connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. And we proved out the viability and in some regards that it's not ready yet to scale. There's a lot of promise, but it's just not market ready yet. And we proved that out across a lot of different planes. But I think at the end of the day, we proved that smart cities are people places. I mean, we can't take the people out of this work. While it's very technology focused, it's very data and wonky and very fun in a lot of ways. It's the culture shift and the adoption and the desirability that will continue to move this space forward. And I think we've confronted that from a climate perspective, from a digital equity perspective, from an infrastructure and a systems and services inside government, that at every step of the way, this is a culture change. And I think where we've arrived at our definition, which has changed, I think at least, every year we have a new iteration of our definition of a smart city. But I think at the end of the day, it's about a bigger culture shift of cities that allows us to be more agile and adaptive, and to design with the user first. What technology we use, what autonomous vehicles, all of that, we're going to continue to compete as cities to get those accolades of being the first or the most innovative. And that's what makes us hungry and better as communities, right? But I think at the end of the day, it's how do we create this adaptability within our communities?
Thank you, Jordan. The second point I would like to cover is obviously the role of stakeholders and mostly their interactions. So when we talk about smart cities or creating tomorrow's metropolis, is the partnership or the collaboration between businesses and the government is essential, and maybe other actors also. So I would like to know what is your how do you see this interaction between those different actors? Maybe Patrick?
Yes, thank you. Donc, la réalité des projets en mode P3 est bien réelle. On peut la voir ici à Montréal, un peu partout. On est fiers présentement de travailler sur la réalisation du projet en collaboration avec la CDPQ à la construction puis à la réalisation du projet du REM. C'est un projet qui va être un projet iconique à Montréal, de classe mondiale. Donc, c'est une infrastructure pour laquelle tous les gens de la Ville de Montréal vont être très fiers de pouvoir participer. Récemment, on a travaillé également à la réalisation du pont Champlain. Je pense que tous les gens qui visitent Montréal ont la chance de voir cette infrastructure-là qui est une icône qu'on peut apercevoir d'à peu près partout dans la ville. L'enjeu qu'on vit de plus en plus avec les réalisations des projets en mode partenariat public-privé est la suivante, c'est qu'il y a un transfert de risque très, très important qui est pris du donneur d'ouvrage qui est transféré aux entrepreneurs ou aux parties prenantes qui vont réaliser le projet. On doit trouver des moyens pour faire en sorte qu'on va pouvoir dérisquer la réalisation et l'exécution de ces projets-là pour faire des projets qui vont être de plus en plus viables. Trouver des façons de travailler en mode collaboration pour le bénéfice de tous. Donc, j'encourage les donneurs d'ouvrage à pouvoir trouver des façons. Donc, il y a déjà des modèles qui existent, qui sont en place ailleurs au pays. Des modes alliances, des modes collaboratifs où chacune des parties prenantes d'un projet vont pouvoir être de la partie puis pouvoir avoir un ouvrage finalement qui va être de meilleur à la fin que tout le monde va pouvoir le regarder, le faire et tout le monde va être heureux d'avoir participé à ce projet-là.
Is it okay if we interject? Yeah, you don't mind? I don't want to steal your job.
You're at the center, sorry.
In the middle. So I think what you said about de-risking and about managing risk, to me, that's one of the critical things that successful smart cities can manage to do, is to find a vehicle to manage that risk. Like there's political risk, there's economic risk, there's environmental risk, there are a bunch of risks, and you may be good at or willing to take risks. Most of your colleagues in that job aren't that keen on risk. They don't want to see their faces on the front page of the paper saying they invested so much in something that didn't work. And the culture of risk in venture capital versus, large engineering versus IT versus, bureaucracy is completely different. I don't actually have a joke for this, but I'm starting to write one in my head about a civil engineer and a software engineer walking into a bar, and the bartender says, "What do you want?" And the civil engineer says something like, "I'll have the same thing I've had for the past 50 years." And the software engineer will probably say something like, "I'll have whatever's on the menu I've never tried before." And having those two kinds of cultures collaborate on something, like cities are really, civil engineering creatures, right? That's how they've been built. And what we're trying to do now is graft a different culture of technology risk onto that. And there's a lot of resistance and tension across those two. I mean, I'm going to say they don't like each other. I mean, I'm sure they could walk into a bar and have a drink together. They're just not going to want to drink the same thing. And so that's, I think that's challenging for cities to try to manage that transition from one kind of engineering to the other, and one appetite for risk, which is risk zero. A civil engineer never wants to see a bridge collapse, right? Versus the software engineer who's happy to have something in beta for 15 years, and if something's broken, they'll just fix it the next day, right? I think that's the challenge, personally. So how do you manage risk?
So it's a very fair question. Philanthropy is often venture capital for cities, so we will often pilot something with philanthropic dollars, and I think our residents have a little bit more understanding if it's with philanthropy that we can try and take something out. We do a lot of pilots. So we have an Israeli company that is called No, which is, I don't love, it doesn't always translate well. No traffic, and they are doing autonomous traffic control in Phoenix, and so they have a bunch of technology where if someone trips crossing the street, we can stop the light and perhaps save a life. But we started at 3 intersections, and so we see how it works, we iterate and we improve, and that has helped us to, we hope, still be on the cutting edge, but learn. We've also, with data, we've found that that's a great way to go in early and make better decisions. We have also an Israeli company. We have companies that are not all from Israel in Phoenix, but they are really advanced on water analytics, and we'll go in and try to understand. So our sewers were so smart. A bakery was dumping cinnamon rolls, and it's very sticky, and the end smell is not as sweet as the starting smell with cinnamon rolls, and we were able to figure out the source and deal with it and keep our water supply, which is very important to us, in a much better situation because we had smart sewers.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the fact you mentioned Israeli companies, just as an aside, in water, that was driven by a need that they have and that you have, right? So sometimes innovation is there because there's an absolute need to be better at something, because if you're not, then you lose a competitive edge.
Well, and water is a really important resource to us, so we're willing to put dollars into making sure we have the best technology to manage it.
One of the de-risks that we've done in Columbus is the creation of Smart Columbus, the entity that I lead, which is a public-private partnership between the corporate CEO group and City Hall, as well as our county government. And that has allowed for, I think, the political commitment from all kind of major actors in the community to be aligned with what this portfolio is going to be and what risks we're going to take. So it's not all on the mayor, it's not all on the business community, it's kind of we're going in together. And when one wins, we all win. When one loses, we all lose, and we can kind of defend against that. And I think that's been a really important political alliance, both because it gets the mayor's priorities on the private sector agenda, but it also, I think, gives the private sector a little bit of that opportunity to push for faster. How do we do things differently? How do we bring in better technology talent and be a part of the solution versus kind of just being the judge and jury on if something gets done right? So it's been a really interesting, I think, operational model. We've had city government employees like in our office as co-teams with us. We're an integrated part of city teams. So the city's Department of Technology, we're really an extension of their team on digital equity. We're an extension of the city's sustainability team on the climate action work. And we become kind of this outsourced, agile group that can go run those pilots that might have higher risk than others.
Thank you. Maybe we can go forward and not forward, but include more actors, because we talk about a lot, governments and businesses, but there's universities, citizens, NGOs. Where they fit into this collaboration? Hard question.
I can go first a little bit. Columbus, we have a saying called the Columbus Way, which is we do everything in partnership, public and private partnership, and it really is a muscle. I mean, there's nothing that I do that's alone. Everything is in tight coordination with another entity in the community. But we've had to, in the smart city space, we've really had to push on that model to say it's not just public and private sector. It's really many Europeans call it the triple helix, which adds the academic into that mix. But I think it's more complicated than that. I think residents are involved. Nonprofits are really important because they're so close to residents in need. They exist to solve problems, right? Like they couldn't fundraise if they couldn't. So we need their pulse on the ground to help us feed up those issues. So it's a really complicated ecosystem and very dynamic. We've done the most, though, in trying to mobilize the private sector. And a lot of the private sector engagement in smart city space has typically been as vendors or transactional partners. We've tried to bring them to the table as equal contributors to the solution. And oftentimes smart city solutions are government, operational efficiency or data or things like that. But typically government goals are collective, right? If we want to get carbon neutrality by 2050, we're not going to do that with just government alone. We're going to need private actors in that as well. So we built a program that really requires action by companies. We have 9 goals, and it's directly aligned with their ESG goals as companies. And so we're able to really engage with our publicly traded companies and large corporations, ones that have big footprints, transitioning their fleets to electric, making sure they're hosting EV charging at all the sites that they own, training their workforce, increasing their purchasing power of renewable energy. And we're holding people publicly accountable as part of this coalition to do this alongside with the city. And I think that that's a really powerful way to get more people acting in this space. And obviously, universities are certainly businesses as well, so they fall into that category. But I actually think the academic space, I've traveled to Phoenix a few times, and what you guys are doing with ASU is probably, the best that I've seen around the world in terms of how you're organizing and using the university as a fulcrum for research and innovation.
But I think what I would say about that is that, and maybe I'm venturing into hazardous territory, the relationship between universities and the private sector in the U.S. and the business model of universities in the U.S. isn't quite the same as it is in other places.
Maybe.
And so I think that the challenge with, if you take this room and you put, academics and private sector and public sector and NGOs in it, and you say, okay, you guys figure it out and let me know when you've come up with something, they'd better have food for a while because they're not going anywhere. So I think what you need is really strong leadership to drive them to identify what problem they're trying to solve and what each one of their roles is going to be to get there. So it's a good idea to have, lots of people at the table to try to contribute to solve a problem, but you have to be ready to do something other than convene them and ask them to solve your problem for you. You really need to provide some leadership. And that's not always there, because that means you have to make it a priority.
Thank you. You want to?
For us, our universities and nonprofit partners have really helped the city move forward. We just got in 2019 a very large investment from TSMC making semiconductor chips in Phoenix, and one of the reasons they said they chose us for advanced manufacturing was Arizona State University and the great workforce that they would have. So to me, our university system underlies so many of the things we do as a city. We often think of them as our think tank, and so when we have difficult challenges, we will put it forward to our universities. They've been key partners on our digital equity work and just really trying to transform our workforce. They push us, but we have companies that push us all the time. So I don't know if anyone was at the transportation aviation panel yesterday. CAE is doing great investments in the city of Phoenix. We are already leaders in vehicle electrification, but having them want to make these great sustainable investment makes it so much easier for us to step up with our airport and go to the next level. For ground vehicles, Hertz is really pushing us to electrify the rental car center. And for me as mayor, I think that's a great chance for pilots to be trained in advanced planes and be familiar with electric aviation. And so many people, I think if they rent a car at my airport that's electric and have a great experience, will be more likely to adapt. So we hope that partnership will really continue and help with better sustainable outcomes. Phoenix is one of more than 100 US cities that has committed to net zero by 2050. We are the fastest growing of the cities in the United States, and so we're going to have to really push to be able to make that ambitious goal. But to me, cities are the laboratories of innovation, and if we're going to get things done on climate change and smart technologies, cities will learn from each other, and I will get to see what works in Columbus and take it. So it's a little hard to hear that not everyone thinks of cities as laboratories of innovation because we really learn so much from each other, and at least compared to our national governments, we feel that we're on the forefront.
Absolutely.
But I think that's the common point, and that's probably why the two of you are on this panel, quite honestly, is because you're willing to be the first at doing something, right? Mm-hmm. And if there isn't a first, because I would say there are many cities that are happy to innovate so long as they do it after somebody else, if that makes sense, which it does. Yeah, exactly. So you show me the three places where you've done this, and I can be comfortable. I'm not taking a risk in doing it. So I think it has to be part of the culture, probably not just of the administration, but of the city, to be willing to accept experiments. I mean, I understand that philanthropy can fund, a 3-intersection, project. Some cities wouldn't want to do it regardless of who's funding it because they're afraid there's a risk, that what if something goes wrong and a truck hits someone because of that? Like, how am I going to manage that? So I'd rather not do it. But show me when Phoenix and Columbus have done it, and then I'll do it maybe 3 or 4 years later just to make sure it's cheaper than what it is now. I think that's...
Thank you. Patrick, vous avez de l'expérience avec les universités, avec les gouvernements, ici au Québec, ailleurs.
Oui.
C'est quoi votre vision, votre perspective là-dessus?
Donc, on développe des partenariats avec les universités. On en a avec l'Université Polytechnique à Montréal, Waterloo en Ontario. Pour nous, c'est très important d'engager les gens des universités avec nous et les autres parties prenantes, en fait, pour nous assurer que tout le monde, on va aller dans la même direction, développer dans la même direction des modèles qui vont faire en sorte que, à la fin de la journée, on va tous être plus confortable de travailler dans des projets partenariats public-privé, par exemple. Donc, c'est de mettre toutes les parties prenantes, encore une fois, au bénéfice des villes, des gouvernements et tout, pour arriver avec les meilleures solutions au meilleur prix possible. On parlait de risque tout à l'heure. J'ai bien aimé l'analogie avec l'ingénieur civil puis la personne informatique dans un bar. Faut prendre en contexte, mettons, pour amener un point. Donc, on s'engage sur des projets, des partenariats publics-privés sur 25 ans, 30 ans et même plus. Donc, qui aurait pu évaluer 5 ans passés que la pandémie serait arrivée depuis 2020, on en a parlé tout à l'heure. Qui aurait pu imaginer que les taux d'intérêt auraient commencé à augmenter, que la chaîne d'approvisionnement aurait été complètement brisée. Donc, c'est des risques qui sont tellement importants puis qui ont un impact direct sur les coûts d'approvisionnement, sur les échéanciers, sur les coûts de financement sur les projets. Donc, à la fin de la journée, c'est très important. Si on veut avoir encore des entreprises qui veulent continuer à travailler dans ce mode de réalisation de projet-là, ben on doit définitivement trouver des moyens pour faciliter, puis d'avoir tout le monde qui regarde, tout le monde autour de la table qui regarde puis qui travaille dans la même direction pour avoir des projets qui sont finalement pour lesquels tout le monde va être fier, puis qu'on va pouvoir avoir des situations gagnantes. Finalement, c'est de mettre des situations gagnantes en place.
Merci Patrick. Donc, il nous reste à peu près une vingtaine de minutes. La conférence, c'est sur l'environnement. Donc, we're going to switch to the main topics or the main subject, green transition. What are the challenges and mostly the opportunities that you see to make things going and, achieve a better world for the next generation? So, Mayor?
We again will hope that cities will hopefully lead the way. And I think we have been, if you look globally at so many of the innovations, whether it be adopting, in our case, renewable energy has been very important to us, with Phoenix being a real hub of solar energy. But we also try to use smart city technologies when we're looking at more nature-based solutions. So we mapped our entire city with help from Salesforce and American Forest, which is the longest tenured forestry nonprofit in the United States, and we're trying to plant trees where there's the most need for shade and heat-related solutions, but it also sequester carbon at the same time. So using technology to address climate change, to address equity, but then still using one of the oldest carbon capture solutions there is, planting trees. We've tried to really take advantage of the innovation in the financial markets. A lot of the debt that is helping us with our water system now, we were able to issue green bonds. We actually, talking about taking risks, we issued our first green bonds in March of 2020 after the major events of COVID. And it ended up going out. The markets were a little bit strange at those times, but they were oversubscribed many times and very competitive rate. And so it was a risk at the time. I think many people in our position were thinking, should we just pause and see what happens with debt markets? And we decided to go forward, and we really appreciate all the financial partners who were more interested in investing in Phoenix because we were climate forward and looking at solutions, and the fact that markets are rewarding our efforts towards resilience has been really important to us. We do some of our climate-related innovation in partnership with philanthropy and business. So we have something called a Blue Bank that helps our particularly industrial companies that want to finance climate-related investments, often using less water. And that has been a great opportunity. Some companies have bought in as part of their ESG programs, and then we have philanthropic dollars, and also just these are investments that save companies money. So it so far seems like a good model for how do we get to the next major goals related to climate change.
Thank you. Jean-François?
Well, so I'm going to tell you another story. This is not about people walking into a bar, but this was, so when we first started talking about smart cities way back, in fact, the conversation was more around environment. And so this was, late 90s, early 2000s. This was after the Kyoto Protocol was signed. And, what we thought we had to tackle were issues around water, around greenhouse gases, specifically as linked to transportation and energy generation. And those were, we thought, really the key problems that we should go after, because they would represent, not the only, but certainly really important environmental challenges for at least a generation to follow. And what we noticed was that, first of all, each of those domains, whether it's water or transportation or energy, are really quite important it's quite important to manage the data around them. Like the data around what those things are, how they're being used, how they're being consumed, how they're being wasted in some cases. The data is really important, and in many cases is non-existent. So really you have to create a really good data pool in order to solve that problem. So now that you know you need data in order to solve this problem, the second thing is, well, what scale should you focus? And if you think about those three, water and transportation and energy, you could try managing it at a supranational level, like UN kind of level. But that's really slow. And we see that with COP, we see that with all kinds of other processes. It's important for that process to exist, but don't expect revolutionary changes from one year to the next, because they're not going to happen. And for the same reason, they don't tend to happen at the national level. You could go micro and work at the company level, but companies and enterprises tend to, work in the playing field that they're given within regulations that are established by the other levels. So there will be some leaders and others who are less so, but it's really hard to have a broad impact if you just focus on, greening companies. The sweet spot is the city. That's where you manage water at the best level. That's where you manage traffic at the best level. That's where you manage energy at the best level. That's about the right size. It's about the right compromise. And so the concept about smart city was really born out of the notion that if we're going to enable a green transformation, then we need to do it at that scale, and we need to focus it at that scale. So I can't unlink personally, I can't unlink smart cities from environment. Like, that's why smart cities exist. Now, there are a bunch of other things that were grafted onto smart cities after, like public security and a bunch of other stuff. But really, that's the core of where it started. So if we want to solve climate change, one tool that we have is to go through smart cities. And to me, smart cities, because there's a technology part to it, you really have to solve the risk-taking portion of it. That's how all that links, right? How do you get cities to take the right risks and evaluate the right risks, to be innovative in areas of implementing technology that will allow them to solve the problems that they should be solving at their scale?
All right, thank you. Patrick?
Yeah, so I'm really cautious as a citizen. By the way, I planted 4,100 trees on my land a couple of years ago because, let's say, for me, this is important. As a citizen, we walk the talk and we demonstrate to people that we believe in it. So
you have a big backyard.
Yeah.
that size.
Yeah.
So net zero is one thing, and what started to make me lose sleep at night is the fact that, let's say, again, it's pretty easy to design something and be net zero. What about the built environment? So this is something that we need to consider, and I don't know. So we did a kind of a study. So 80% of the built environment will still be there in 2050, which is a very big challenge for us. So decarbonization goes with net zero. So this is really important. We take that into consideration, and we help cities in making sure that we will put effort and energy there in order to make sure that decarbonization will be part of the investment plan. So it's the level of energy required to decarbonize compared to building a new infrastructure with net zero principle is like crazy, the difference between the two. So we developed internally within SNC-Lavalin something called decarbonomics. So this is a 3-steps principle where we help clients, let's say, benchmarking their portfolio of buildings, because, by the way, 40% of the carbon emission comes from buildings. So first step is benchmarking portfolio of building, and then making together, let's say, a roadmap in order to prioritize what we will do. And then the last one is to let's say, measure what we had put together and make sure that, let's say, we can't improve what we are not measuring. So this is part of the 3 basic principles that we've put in place. And as a company, we need also to demonstrate that we are a good corporate citizen. So we did put in place a statement where our CEO told the shareholders sooner this year that by 2030 we will be carbon zero, so net zero, sorry. So where we are renting offices all across the country. So for us, it is important to walk the talk again and demonstrate that we can, as a corporate citizen, demonstrate that we can do what's needed. So thank you.
Thank you. Jordan, do you want to add something?
Sure. I think there's a lot of the ingredients that we've talked about that are coming to life in Columbus. So this local ambition is absolutely driving the progress where we are. We do not have. We live in a state where there are some disagreements on how aggressive we should be in addressing climate. We are not on the same page in terms of how to use federal or state resources or other public resources to encourage this transition. And so we are really depending on local action to make the biggest difference. And so that local ambition and the goal that the mayor set, similar to what mayor shared, is this 2050 carbon neutrality goal. But from there is all the actors that are a part of it, the private sector to the public sector and to the resident alike. And we've spent about 3 or 4 years to really build out an ecosystem for EV adoption. And through that, we were in the bottom 10% of major metros in the United States who were adopting electric vehicles. As about 0.8%. We have increased it by 500% over the course of 3 years and are the fastest growing EV market in the Midwest. But a lot of that is because we prepared the infrastructure, we prepared the dealers, we convinced OEMs to distribute product to us, because in the United States, you don't have to have nationwide distribution of EVs. You can prioritize the states that require you to, and Ohio is not one of those. And then through that, we actually did the nation's largest energy aggregation through our city utility. And so the voters voted to vote towards green energy on their electric bills. And so there was a lot of resident action, actually, that has helped spur, I think, the transition in our community. And we want to continue to stimulate that and build that movement. There's a lot of employees calling for greater transparency on ESG goals. And there's a lot of this younger workforce that really cares that people are walking the talk and not greenwashing this data. And so that is something in the youth movement that's happening in Columbus around sustainability is really, I think, part of what's keeping us this on the forefront. And you're going to see, I think, in a community like ours, which I'm sure there are communities in similar states across Canada as well, but going from sustainability being a project to being an intersectional priority. And we're amidst that transition right now, and thinking about it's not just electrifying transportation, but it's the whole system, right? And it's not just about getting more people on public transit, it's creating efficiencies within our transportation sector. And so there's so many intersectional components that we haven't built the narrative for yet, but we're building the movement where we are. And I'll go back to where I started. This is about culture change. This is really, the technology's there, the playbooks are there, there's cities way ahead of us, but we have to have the courage and the ability to build the support for it. So.
Thank you. So only 5 minutes left. What will be the key message you want to say to the audience? So maybe I will start with Mayor.
I hope that you'll see that cities really are amazing partners. So if you have a company that wants to try a better technology for the built environment, advanced mobility, make your mark on climate change, please think of Columbus and Phoenix.
I appreciate that.
We are trying all sorts of different things. There's more than 1,000 cities globally that have committed to net zero. We're each going to have a different path to getting there. And so I think I would encourage you all to look for the right municipal partners, but there are great ones out there with very motivated leadership.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Jean-François?
I think what you just said, I'm just going to put a meta message around that, which is that if you can see visionary cities saying, use me as a sandbox, because to develop the future, they understand that's the way they're going to attract their future citizens and their future companies. And all these companies are going to have to deal with climate change at some point. All the citizens you're going to have come into your city also want to live in a city that is going to be healthy and pleasant to live in. So the cities that will be successful in the future are the ones that, like Phoenix and Columbus, are attracting companies to work there, to experiment, because there's a space, a safe space for them to try new things. And there'll be the cities that have created a livable environment that is attractive for all the knowledge workers that don't have to go into the office every day. Like, that's a new kind of population that, I'm not sure how big that's going to be. Maybe it'll get bigger, maybe not. But it's really tempting now to think that there could be a whole generation of people that work for a company in a different city than where they set up. And so you have to be attractive to both if you're going to be successful in a city. And that means being great at innovating and being great at dealing with the environment. And if you can do both at the same time, innovating and dealing with the environment, that's your winning formula.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Patrick?
So every steps count within the goal to reach, let's say, the net zero environment by 2050. So make sure that and all of us have a role to play in there. So make sure that we will make the right decision at the right time. And this is it. Thank you.
I would just add equity as an important consideration in all of this. We're spending a lot of time thinking about how do we use this movement towards smart cities in this moment in time to rebuild more equitably, and what can the promise of sustainability do to improve public health and quality of life? What does the promise of technology mean to improve safety for the resident, not just for the system? I think that there's a real opportunity to face these kind of systemic injustices and challenges that we've inherited for a long time and say, let's do it differently. And that's one of the things that gets me so excited about the smart cities space, is because I think it's constantly about what's new and next, and equity has to be a part of that conversation. So I challenge us all to make sure that's present in all of our conversations moving forward.
Thank you. Le panel touche à sa fin, donc j'aimerais remercier nos panélistes pour cette conversation très inspirante. Merci. Thank you.